Vladimir Putin has warned NATO countries they risk nuclear war if they send troops to Ukraine. The Russian leader has been delivering his annual State of the Nation address 2 weeks ahead of a presidential election that he is expected to win. Little to no opposition stands in his way. Putin told Russians in his speech that he would be stationing more soldiers in Russia's west, close to new NATO members Finland and Sweden. Now, Putin's nuclear warning comes after France's president refused to rule out the possibility of Western nations sending troops to Ukraine. This was later rejected by the US and Germany. Here's some of what Putin said.
They should eventually understand that we also have weapons, and they know it. I just said it now myself, weapons that can hit targets on their territory. Everything that the West is coming up with now, what they threaten the world with, it can result in a conflict with the use of nuclear weapons, and therefore the destruction of civilization.
Our Riga Bureau Chief Yuri Roshetto has been following Putin's speech. Now, DW has been reporting from Latvia since it was forced to close its office in Russia 2 years ago. Welcome, Yuri. What's your reaction to what we just heard from Putin? What message is he sending to Europe and the West?
Well, Anya, what we've just heard from the Russian president was a clear threat to the West, addressed to the NATO countries that allegedly want to destroy Russia. Putin responded to you said it, to the words of the French president, who didn't rule out the idea of NATO soldiers in Ukraine, which was rejected by the US and Germany. But Putin threatened that the consequences of such a move could be tragic for those who would send soldiers to Ukraine. He also commented on the rumors that Russia allegedly wanted to station nuclear weapons in space, which he called fake news, and accused the Americans of spreading them, giving the US election campaign as the reason.
Now, given Russia's recent military gains in Ukraine, did he say anything more about the war?
Well, Putin has once again given a kind of history lesson with his view of the war. According to Putin, Russia is defending itself from NATO. We've heard that several times. It's nothing new. Putin thanked the people in Russia for supporting his war policy in Ukraine, and once again very sharply attacked the Western countries that allegedly want Russia to fall. Russia, he said, would continue to follow its war aims. In this context, Putin also talked about the arms industry in Russia, which is running at full speed. This means that an end to the war is obviously not to be expected anytime soon.
Now, presidential elections are just 2 weeks away now in Russia. Putin is the only viable candidate. What did he have to say to Russians about this upcoming vote?
Well, yes, this was Putin's 19th speech to the nation, and it was a political speech, just as one would expect shortly before the election from a politician, the only difference being that there is no real democratic election to be expected in Russia. So Putin focused on many internal successes or issues. He praised, among other things, the stability of the Russian economy, which hasn't collapsed under Western sanctions. It should be said that most Russians don't actually live in poverty, but the sanctions are going to have a long-term impact, whether in the aviation industry, where parts of Western aircraft are running out, or in medicine, where shortages are allegedly emerging. Food prices have also increased. That also Putin haven't mentioned. But Putin has promised many social guarantees, and that was clearly standard election campaign rhetoric.
OK, so we know that Putin will remain president. Is it possible to gauge how popular he really still is with the Russian people?
Well, look, according to the independent Levada Center, which is pretty reliable and, by the way, classified as a foreign agent in Russia, so according to Levada, Putin's personal popularity is 65%. 80% of Russians are generally satisfied with Putin's policies, which certainly includes the war in Ukraine. There are various reasons for this popularity. I think the most important reason is that Russians see no alternative. The political field in Russia has been cleared after 24 years of Putin in power. Many older people in Russia still thank him for a certain stability after the chaotic 90s. And, of course, we mustn't underestimate the power of propaganda, which does everything it can to make Russians believe that Russia would have been attacked by NATO and must therefore now defend itself. What these people don't consider that Russia is now completely isolated, at least in Europe, and NATO is right on Putin's doorstep, so to speak, after the entering of Sweden and Finland. That's what Putin wanted to avoid, but that's exactly what he got.
Yuri, thank you so much for that analysis. That's DW's Riga Bureau Chief, Yuri Richetto. Now, as we just heard there, Putin's veiled nuclear threat came after President Emmanuel Macron of France, a NATO member, suggested it might eventually be necessary for allies to consider deploying ground troops to Ukraine. Now, that idea was quickly shot down by other Western leaders, including the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. In a new video message, Scholz again seeks to allay concerns among German voters of any direct involvement in the war.
NATO is not and will not be party to the war. That remains the case. We do not want Russia's war against Ukraine to become a war between Russia and NATO. We agree on this with all our allies. This also means no German participation in the war. To put it bluntly, as German Chancellor, I will not be sending any members of the German armed forces to Ukraine. Our soldiers can count on that. And you, too, can count on that.
Hans Brandt is DW's political correspondent. Hans, explain to us why the German Chancellor is emphasising so vehemently and repeatedly that German soldiers will not be deployed in Ukraine.
Well, just think about the prospect of German soldiers on the Eastern Front fighting Russian troops. It's a memory from the Second World War, which ended in disaster for Germany and for the whole of Europe. It's something that sends shivers down many, many backs here in Germany. So what the Chancellor really was trying to do is to reassure his voters, to reassure the German population that this traumatic prospect is not going to be realized under his chancellorship. He was, in fact, speaking to the German public more than to his allies, more than to France's President Emmanuel Macron. At the same time, one has to see that Chancellor Scholz is very clear about Germany operating in the conflict in Ukraine within the context of alliances, within the context of the NATO alliance. And there, Germany will continue to play its part, to give a lot of money to Ukraine and also to deploy troops, and frankly, to NATO countries such as Lithuania. So it's an address to the German public. It's an attempt to set a red line. At the same time, it's not really a withdrawal from the NATO alliance from German side.
DW political correspondent Hans Brandt, thank you so much.